It's two conscious guys talking, where conscious male leaders come together and have a discussion that is deep, that is nourishing, that allows us to see the illumination of consciousness that's unfolding progressively for men that are waking up in the world, and where you can get insights on your own awakening as a man, and also for amazing women that want to learn more about men's challenges and struggles that have created some of the dysfunction we've seen within men in its society, often called, quote unquote, the patriarchy and other terms. What created it? What is the genesis of it all? What can we do about it today to empower men to be all that they're meant to be and to support the awakening of consciousness for men and women and all? Hey, John, I'm just so grateful to be with you today.
Pleased to see you again, Daniel. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, we've had such great connections through the years, and grateful. Yeah, wow, what a year you've had. You've had some great expansion. We're going to get into that along the way, but wow, it just shows what's possible, right? Like all the contraction, all the things you've dealt with for so many decades, and you've had highs and lows within it, but
yes,
you've had a massive breakthrough in your life, energetically, psychologically, spiritually this year. I just want to highlight that up front, because there were so many decades, so many years where you didn't think it may be ever possible. And, I just know that through our conversations and maybe my intuition a little bit, but a lot of our conversations, I know that through. And I just want to start the show with that, because there's a lot of people that feel like, I've been dealing with this for so long with what I'm dealing with. Everybody says blah, 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 but they don't get it, blah, 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 right? So, but hopefully your voice can be one of the ones that can resonate for some people. Like, I get where he's coming from. Oh my God, that's possible. I could actually get free with this feeling I have, this weight I have, or whatever, however they experience it. So I'm grateful for what's been unfolding for you. And it's so magnificent what's unfolded for you. So yeah, and we'll get into the details here in a moment, but I'm so grateful. All right, so let's get into it then. So yeah, we're talking about men and mental health during this series. So wow, where do we start? You've had a big history with a lot of different things. Maybe you could start a little bit about like the childhood aspect for you. What did it mean to be a man there? You grew up there in Australia, I believe, or is that incorrect?
No, that's correct. I grew up here, down under, and but coming back to childhood, Daniel, it was upon reflection. Of course, it didn't feel like this when I was a kid, but upon reflection, it was every single step along the way was leading me to eventually have the breakthrough that I had. But when I say it all, I'm talking about what was to come after. I was adopted, and my biological mother, she was very young, but 1965, unwed, pregnant, uncool. She was from a very strict Catholic family. She was forced by her family to give up the baby. Now, I've perhaps, with the deep amount of work that I've done around this, I've perhaps made up a belief, even in utero, that if my natural mother, my biological mother, can give me away, how much can I be worth? Now, this was deeply unconscious thread of worthlessness. It was unbeknownst to me. It was unconscious, but it was all pervasive through my life, where I didn't feel worthwhile of just being here. I thought everybody outside of me was better than me. And so there's that first thread that was to weave itself together into what was to become the fabric of my life, eventually to lead me down a pretty dark sort of path where I didn't feel very good about myself. And combine that with I was a very, very sick kid. I was born with asthma. I still have asthma, but it's under control now. And I spent the first 120 months of my life, the first 10 years, 57 of those I spent in a hospital for how ill I was. And
Wow.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. I don't remember very much of this, but I nearly died 9 times before I was 10 years old. And it was pretty frightening. Frightening, not so much for me, but frightening for who I call my mum and dad. When I say mum and dad to you, these are the people who came to pick me up out of the orphanage. I spent the first 5 weeks of my life in an orphanage. And I'm growing up in a very kind, loving, generous, compassionate environment, family dynamic, where my mum and dad's fear had presented as especially mum, being very, very strict and not allowing me to really learn to live life on life's terms, learning to respond. And I was always looking outside of me for people to do things for me, because I'm growing up in an environment where mum or my aunties or my grandparents or my dad would, oh, you poor little thing, you're so sick, I will do that for you. And so I'm growing up. My little fragile ego has taken that hostage and not allowed me to learn to be responsible. So I was growing up to be really irresponsible. When I say to you irresponsible, I don't mean it when you hear that term. When I hear that term of irresponsible, you think that young teen running around being irresponsible. When I say to you irresponsible, what I really mean is I'm unable to respond in a fashion that's conducive to me living in a fashion that would lead me to what it was that I wanted. And what I wanted was to be connected. What I wanted was to be able to sit with my dad and talk and share with him these extraordinary thoughts that I would have about life and the universe, as much as a young kid can. Mm-hmm. But he was 52 years old when I was born. By the time I'm 10, he's 62. By the time I'm 20, he's in his early 70s. And he was very kind, always physically present, but never look, as a young fellow, I intuitively knew, Daniel, that I needed a good, strong male role model in my life. And he just wasn't available. There isn't any malice, there isn't any anger when I share that with you. It's just the way it was. Mm-hmm. So I turned to the females in my life. I turned to my mother or my mother's younger sister, my auntie, and it was interesting. I look back now, many of my friends, in particular at school, they're all girls. Mm-hmm. And I think it all stemmed out of, that first primary male role model in my life just not being available. Mm-hmm. He was very kind. He was physically present, but just emotionally and spiritually, I needed that role model to have, but he just wasn't available. So I'd look for it outside. I'd look for it elsewhere. And then I, get to 13, 14, I think I was about 13 and a half, Dan, and puberty started late for me. But between 13 and 19, I went from 5'5" and about 150, 140 pounds to 6'3" and 220 pounds. So I doubled in weight practically. And getting all these frames of reference from the opposite sex. Oh, look at you, John. Look at your muscles, and I was able to ride my bike and swim. My asthma is dissipating. My body's feeling stronger. I don't have a male guidance model to follow. So I'm intuitively sort of taking pieces from this and taking pieces from that. And really, Daniel, it bottom lining, and I was looking for who I am. Who am I? Right from the beginning. So there's an undercurrent of worthlessness going on. There's a there's a threat of irresponsibility going on, and then puberty hit. I've doubled in size. I'm getting a lot of younger girls saying, "Oh my God, John, look at you." And as typical of a late teen, 17, 18, 19 years old, very arrogant and thinking that I knew everything, bulletproof, where I didn't actually know anything. And so by the time I get to 19 years old, I'm worthless, irresponsible, and thought that I knew everything. But I didn't know anything.
Mm-hmm.
And what was to happen then, I was working in the hospitality industry. And what was to happen then was I went on a 2-week holiday up to far north Queensland, which is 2,500 miles north of here. It'd be the equivalent of you traveling to Costa Rica, I'd imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the area. It was a 2-week holiday that took me 5 years to come back from.
Mm-hmm.
It was in that gap there that I began to walk in dark territory. Whilst a beautiful area physically, I am working very hard, but also living, playing, and working with some, shall we say, very interesting people. And my drinking of alcohol was beginning to escalate. I didn't know then what I was alleviating was the internal pain that was going on in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
My drinking is escalating, not so much to want to change the way that I felt about myself, but more so to keep up with these people that I'm cohabiting with.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only a matter of time. I look back now, Daniel, and it was only probably 8 or 9 months, and I'm drinking 6 or 7 days a week. Not very much, mind you, but I'm drinking. And my behaviour is never violent, not one of these sort of people that would drink a bottle of rum and then want to fight everybody. It was never like that, but I was just absolutely insane. Very, very mental. Can I share with you one story when I say to you mad?
Sure. Give us fun example, or fun in retrospect, not so fun maybe back in a way, but back then. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, one night, a very early one morning, I had a bottle of vodka under my belt, so I was quite drunk, and I stole a friend of mine's motorcycle, and it was a big one, GSX 1100, then one of the most powerful road bikes on the planet, and I stole that bike in a monsoon. It's the equivalent of a cyclone. What do you call them? Hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
Rode that. It was about 120-mile round trip at 2 o'clock in the morning on a stolen bike in a hurricane, unlicensed, uninsured, and drunk,
Mm-hmm.
in the nude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Look back now, and that was a primal, mad scream for attention, mixed up with a very unconscious sort of death wish.
Yeah.
And I have all these people around me saying, John, we love working with you. We love living with you. You're a great guy. You're very loving. You're kind. You're generous. But man, when you drink, you are just insane. That's one story that I've shared with you. And I have many, many of them.
Right.
But Daniel, I was looking for myself. I was looking for something that was already inside, but I'm looking outside.
Mm-hmm.
And that led to very, very dark territory for nearly a decade.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nearly. And
wow.
it was, and it was tough. It really was. It was tough.
If we could just stop there for a second to reflect on that, and then we'll hear more of your journey. But yes. I just I mean, like how like that, it all makes sense to the listener probably. Like, of course, like you couldn't do much when you're growing up for the first 10 years. You were sick. You're told you're limited constantly, basically, right? You don't have the chance to explore and experiment with life. Well, that can only lead to later for a lot of, for someone like you that wants to experience life. They want to do all kinds of things, right? To be led down that path and to be looking for all the other things you talked about. You didn't have the male role model, your dad wasn't fully present with you at all, or whatever, and then you're looking for that attention and that connection as well, and all these things, so it all makes sense. And I just think, like, I would love for everybody to listen into their own story. Well, what was the first 10 years of your life like, guys? Like, women too, if you're listening. But when we look at those first 10 years, it's like, I think it's very telling, right, of what's going to come next. Because when I think of my first 10 years, it was a mix of nothing as dramatic, obviously, as yours. Like, not many of us, some do, but not many of us have those kind of stories. But it was, just a very quick summary. It was like the idea that I had a different experience, and that I did feel unconditionally loved, although maybe that's the same as you. You did say you felt the love. So I felt this love. My dad was around, but I felt like at that time in my life, I didn't feel like he was always strongly present with me either. So I will say that. So there was some of that. And a lot of, I don't know how it is for other guys, but for me, I would go to my mom. I would talk to my mom, whereas dad is just there. Yeah, we talk, but we're watching a ball game or doing something together, right? It's different. Whereas if you need something emotionally, yeah, you're gonna go to your mom. Go to your mom to talk about that stuff, right? So you go to with your emotions there. But some of the things I'm learning during that time are, you know, 10 years or even beyond that, it's like guys basically aren't available for emotions, the deeper stuff, and women are. And that's where I would prefer to focus. When I do open up, I want to go deeper. So right away, the seed was there. Like, I want women in my life, but very similar for you with you in that regard. And I always was quiet. So then, when I would become more boisterous, people would look weird at me, right? What's your issue? And it's like, I'm enjoying myself. Why not be boisterous, right? And and I and so when I started showing up, when I got to be a teenager, I would start to want to show up more that way, right? So I would do things that people can't even believe that I would do. Nothing again at your level, but I would, vandalize houses and all these things that you couldn't, you wouldn't imagine someone like me doing. But I was like, I'm not exactly who you think, like, and so I would get into these things, and people would say, oh, you're not much, physically and whatnot. And then I'd be like, okay, let me show you what I am physically. And then I would do feats of strength or whatever, throw people around, and everybody's like, how did that happen? We didn't expect that from you or whatever. I'm like, yeah, now you know what you're dealing with, So I always was tapped into this idea that I'm infinite power and energy, that I have it in me, right? So I didn't know what that was all about as a kid, but I had that sense of access young, and you did too in your own way too. But so then, I had depression, I had anxiety, I had all those things. I told my psychiatrist I could make things happen, I could blow things up, I can move objects. And
Yes.
what are they going to say? You're mentally ill, right? They're going to give you pills and all kinds of things. And then I'm like, okay, you don't talk about that stuff, you get off the pills, and then we'll, I guess that's what we have to do. We can't tell the truth. And so then it puts you in a pickle. Okay, I can't be who I am, basically, is what I'm being told. And then that leads to all kinds of, issues with mental health, etc. So yeah, again, not as dramatic as stories at all than what you're saying, but I just wanted to relate, like, and then I want other people to hear their own story. Like, listen to your own story. Like, you hear, guys, like, you have a similar stories probably in your own ways, certain threads or whatever your story is, even if it isn't similar. Like, think about, like, listen, it all comes from somewhere, to have that compassion, that love for yourself. Like, okay, of course I've behaved the way I have, and I experienced the things I did. And because you might think you didn't achieve enough, or you made mistakes and you can't forgive yourself or whatever. And like, there's a reason. There's a reason. There's a deeper reason why all these things have unfolded, and they go even beyond, what we can imagine, but we could get into that more too, like the deeper spiritual reasons and whatnot. But anyway, John, I just wanted to share a little bit about my story as well, and just have people realize there's a reason why we got to where we are. And it's all just part of our path. I don't know how else to put it, right? So I'll let you fill in from there, but like I just wanted to track together with you a little bit to share about this mental health journey, because I always tell people, like, I wasn't insane with it, but I was doing the drinking and everything in high school, and it's like, I just, okay, give me the bottle, I can start chugging it, right? Like beer bongs, everything, like when I was young, And then when college came, I'm like, okay, I've done all that. I don't need that as much now. I had enough. Like it's like I didn't take that long of a period of time for me to feel like, okay, what's the point? It's not as great as what everybody makes it out to be all the time. So that was more of my path with that stuff. But we all have our own stories, right? So anyway, so John, I mean, I was discovering myself in that process, and you were too. And I think that's what's so cool about it. It's like we were discovering who we really are in the process. So that's what I'm seeing in it.
Yes. Yeah. And look, thank you for sharing that little piece of your little piece of background with me and I totally resonate. Even as a young boy, I knew that this was beyond knowing, this was beyond languaging, that I knew that all of us, are far more vast than this. I wasn't able to language it. I wasn't able to even think about it in a coherent sort of fashion, but it was just that knowing of, I heard it put in a fashion pretty recently, the last 3 or 4 years, where I heard it said that at the level of the soul, nothing is missing. From the level of the senses, things appear to be missing. And that really deeply resonated with me when I was able to reflect back on those decades of, that is exactly what I was looking for, that I knew inherently that not so much the reason why I was here, but more so that how I was living, how I was thinking, how I was emotionally, not crippled isn't the right word, but by the time I'm into my early 20s, even my early 30s, my capacity to be able to emote, my capacity to be able to understand how my emotions work was somewhat stunted. I had an EQ of about a 14 or a 15-year-old boy, and I wasn't able to respond to life on life's terms. Life is going to do what life is going to do, whether we like it or not. and we cannot at all control the things that happen, but what we can control is our response to it. And I was yet to learn that. I was always reacting, not responding. And eventually, let me come back to, I'd been in relationship with some very kind, loving, compassionate girls who are able to handle John, but not able to handle John when John drinks. And, upon reflection, Dan, every single relationship that I'd been in with these very kind girls, I was the one who was left. It wasn't me who did the leaving. It was me who was left, which really bounced up and connected to that unconscious thought I had that I wasn't worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
I would unconsciously manifest behavior to prove that belief to be true. And that's all it was just a belief. And you and I both know that all a belief is thought that's thought over and over and over again. Until I met the girl who was to become my wife. And we've been married for 27 years now. But when we got together, Daniel, it happened very, very quickly. It was one of those moments where when you know that you know that you know that you know, within 11 days of us meeting, I'd ask her to marry me. And within 11 months, we were married. And within 6 months after that, our twin boys were born. And we had a whole cohort of people around us saying, oh, you're mad, you'll be divorced in a year. How can you do this? You don't know each other. But here we are, nearly 3 decades down the track. What she has done for me is she has stood her ground. And she has allowed me to explore, and she's allowed me to understand. And this, Daniel, when she found out how much I was actually drinking, fairly close to the beginning of our relationship, she didn't meet it with horror. She didn't meet it with, oh my God, I'm leaving. She didn't do any of that. She sat me down. She held my hand. She looked me in the eye and she said to me, John, there is something far more vast running through you than you could possibly see right now, sweetheart. You are sick and I want you to get better, and I want to stick around to see it happen. And she has. She has had ups and downs, as every relationship does. She has stood her ground and really lit the way forward for me. And she's an extraordinarily powerful woman that has allowed me to begin to explore who I am. Where am I here? What am I to do? What is it that who is it that I'm to serve? And I see so many of my men friends who are in relationship, but that relationship mightn't be truly connecting on an emotional and spiritual level. It can be not. See, I see codependent relationships. I see independent relationships. But I don't see very many interdependent relationships where those people are, walking their own path, but they're doing it together. And this is what I get to do now is sit with men and women, and coming back to what it is that you said only a moment ago, is getting very clear on the story that we tell ourselves. Very, very clear, and actually asking a question. Dan, I get to speak now and share my story, and it's of hope and inspiration that there is life after mucking it up. And I would be telling my story to others, and it might be in an intimate conversation with one or two other men, and work out that actually what I was sharing with them didn't actually happen. So what I'm saying is that there are portions of my story that I thought happened. I'd think it so many times that it finally twisted itself into a belief that just wasn't true. So if I'm believing something that's not true, it's no wonder I ended up where I ended up. This thought that I had that I wasn't worthwhile was born out of thoughts that I had. It wasn't true. My biological mother was forced. She would have, I imagine, she would have loved to have kept the child. But she was forced by a very strict Catholic family to give up the baby because of the shame it brought upon the family. And so those thoughts that I had that were not true led me down a path that was eventually lead me back to here. But it's so important that the story that we tell ourselves is asking that first question: is that true? Did that happen? Because a lot of the things that I used to think and feel and talk about were predicated on a thought that wasn't correct.
Right. Yeah, totally. So can you give us an example of that? Like, give us one example.
Well, the biggest one I can give you, Daniel, is is that one that I would truly believe that I wasn't worthwhile because my natural mother gave me away. But that wasn't true. I imagine, now I don't know whether this is true, we're actually, as an aside, we, meaning me and the benevolent society down here, are making inroads to finding her. She'll be in her late 70s now, I would imagine. And that thought that I had, that if my natural mother can give me away, how much can I be worth, was born out of me being left alone for 36 days in an orphanage. Now, I caught up with a nurse, a sister. This was run by nuns here in Sydney. And she was in her mid-80s, and she was telling me, John, I actually worked in that orphanage. I worked in that hospital in June in 1965. It's more than likely I changed your nappy, I changed your diaper. She said the only time those babies were touched was when your nappies were changed and when you were fed. So that means that you were swaddled and left alone for at least 21 hours a day. Now, you and I both know that any sort of child that is left untouched, there's going to be a failure to thrive.
Yeah.
And so these thoughts that I had are born out of my experience. But whilst experience showed me that, it's even, this is pre-languaging. Oh my God, I've been left on my own. I cannot be worth anything. I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't true.
Right.
It wasn't true because, well, clearly I'm still alive. But,
right.
but my biological mother, she was forced by her family to give it. She didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If that's true, which it is, that must mean that my thought that I had is about not being worthwhile isn't true. This is part of the breakthrough that I had at the beginning of this year. And if I had that wrong, what else did I have wrong? I'll tell you what else I had wrong. I was drinking quite a lot, as I've shared. And I'd have people, Daniel, ask me, John, really, man, why do you drink so much? And Daniel, I would truthfully say to them, the reason I drink so much is because I have all these problems, not recognizing that I had all the problems because I drank so much. Yeah. And if I had backwards, what else did I have backwards? And there's two thoughts that had woven themselves into a belief that I thought were true that were not true, that weren't true. So if my life is predicated on untruths, what else is actually going on in my life? And this led to I call it a breakdown, but it was more so a grand awakening. It really shook me apart. It really did. And the breakthrough was to, as you've intimated, is to very clear